It's a beautiful city of Wilsonville in the state of Oregon. My name is Jong-Woo Han. I am the president of World History Digital Education Foundation that focuses on the Korean history, culture, economy, geography, anything but the Korean War as a legacy of the Korean War. It's my great pleasure and honor to meet you, sir. Please introduce yourself. What is your name, sir?
My name is Charles Gregory Caldwell.
So your first name is Charles?
Charles. And I go by my middle name, which causes problems sometimes. But yes, Charles Gregory Caldwell.
Could you spell your full name?
It's C-H-A-R-L-E-S. Gregory is G-R-E-G-O-R-Y. Caldwell, C-A-L-D-W-E-L-L.
What is your birthday, sir?
My birthday is August 9th, 1948.
48, that makes you?
Almost 74.
74, almost.
I'm 70, well, next in August I'll be 74.
It's coming.
Yes.
But you look terrific.
Thank you.
Now you have some wrinkles when you when you laugh, but
you.
I don't see any.
Yeah,
Is there any secret?
No.
No
Maybe
secret
kimchi.
formula?
Kimchi.
Do you eat kimchi?
Of course.
Really?
Yeah.
So is there a place to buy kimchi here?
You can buy kimchi anywhere, in any of the stores here.
Huh.
Yeah.
And where were you born?
I was born in North Carolina, in Newton, North Carolina.
Newton?
Yeah, N-E-W-T-O-N. But I grew up in Maiden, North Carolina. That Newton was the nearest hospital, but I grew up in Maiden, M-A-I-D-E-N, North Carolina.
So tell me about your family background when you were growing up, your parents and your siblings.
Well, we were a small family of 4. My father came from a family of 10. My grandmother lived right out the street from us, and so we stayed in Maiden for many years. And I have one sister, a younger sister, who's 5 years younger than I am. My dad worked in construction and as a long-distance truck driver, mostly on the East Coast, as far west as Chicago. And he was, home for several days, and then he would go on trips for several days. My mom was a crosswalk guard at the school right in front of our house.
Yeah.
And she did that for many years. And she became a policewoman in the little town of Maiden where we worked. But
wow.
It was mostly she just walked around in her uniform, but that's what they did.
Community patrol.
Yes, and it was a very small town, 2,500 people. So very small town.
And tell me about your educational background, high school, when did you graduate, and so on, please.
Yeah, I went to grade school right across the street from my house, and then high school, I used to walk there, it was within a mile, at Maiden High School in Maiden, North Carolina.
Maiden High School?
Yeah, Maiden.
And when did you graduate?
I graduated in 1966.
1966.
Right. And then I went to Mars Hill College after that.
Could you spell it?
Yeah, M-A-R-S Hill, H-I-L-L, College. Well, now it's a university, but then it was Mars Hill College in Mars Hill, North Carolina. It was a small Baptist college because we grew up as Baptist church members. And I went to Mars Hill. I majored in English. I graduated in 1970.
1970.
Right.
So tell me about your awareness on anything related to Korea at the time, by the time that you graduated from high school. Did you know anything about Korea?
I knew very little about Korea, except that my uncle served in the Korean War.
Your uncle?
Yes, he did.
What's his name?
His name was Fred, I don't know his middle name, but Fred Caldwell. And he was in Korea. I don't know any of the details. He's passed away now, but he was my dad's youngest brother. And so all I knew was he was in Korea. That's all I knew. I didn't know where Korea was, or didn't think about it at that time.
That means that you were not taught anything about Korea during your high school days?
No, nothing that I remember at all.
Didn't you have a world history class?
Well, we had world history, but usually that was a more modern part of history, and many times we never got to that. You know, they were behind in classes or whatnot, so we never got to. I don't remember anything about learning about the Korean War.
Do you remember that? Were there any text mentioning about Korea in world history textbook?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember? No. So you didn't know where Korea was in the map?
Well, probably not at that time when I graduated from high school. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, your uncle, and it's exactly the same question that I'm asking to Korean War veterans. Yeah. Did you know anything about it? Did you learn anything about Korea from your history class? And they say 99.99% saying no.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And my uncle never talked about it. I mean, when my uncle would come to visit, he never talked about Korea. So it's just something that that never really came up in conversation. And a lot of Korean War veterans don't really like to talk about the
Exactly.
Korean War.
That's why it's been known as forgotten.
Right, right.
So Korean War broke out in 1950, and you graduated high school 1966, 16 years apart, but that facts that no awareness of Korea whatsoever during your high school the education, not just you, but almost every American citizen around that time was also the case, as was the Korean War veterans.
Probably so. Probably so. And I had not traveled. You know, growing up, we had gone to Canada. Mm-hmm. That was my only international experience.
What brought you to Canada?
My dad just he took us up there. We drove up to Canada and did a little touring there. And we did travel around the United States. I mean, you know, to Kentucky and different places. We traveled around to Florida and whatnot. But I had never really, except for Canada, I had not been overseas at all and didn't have much exposure. Now, when I was in senior year, I guess it was, of college, I was chosen to go to Puerto Rico for about 2 weeks with a group of students, and we went down there to see, I think it was called Operation Bootstrap, where they're pulling their country up and whatnot. But I really didn't have much exposure to anything international, even though I will say that I was always interested after John F. Kennedy mentioned the Peace Corps when he started that. That, to me, was very interesting.
So before we go into that portion, you are sitting with the Korean flag behind you, right, and the Stars and Stripes, and right, you are the honorary consul,
yes,
of Korea in Oregon, representing Oregon, and you've been to Korea as a Peace Corps volunteer, correct, and you were also Fulbright scholar.
I was.
So that's a kind of metamorphosis. It's like a transformation from knowing nothing on Korea, but now you are representing Korea here.
Yes, that's true.
Tell me about it. What do you think about this, such a radical change in your life?
Well,
how do you put it into perspective, and how do you think about it?
Well, I think about, I know that going to the Peace Corps changed my life in many, many different ways. It made me much more aware of the world. It gave me insight into other cultures. It gave me insight into the fact that not everyone thinks the way that Americans do. You know?
That's a very important knowledge.
Yes, very important. And so it really, that experience changed my life. It made me much more of a internationally minded person. And it was not an easy thing to do. living in Korea at the time, we'll go over that, I'm sure, later, but it was a poor country, and it was not easy, but it was one of the best experiences of my life.
Mm-hmm. So could you briefly describe about your role as a honorary consul in Oregon, and how did you become, and what is the process, just briefly, and what do you do?
Well, the process is a dual appointment between Korea, and it has to be approved by the U.S. State Department. It took about 14 months.
Very official then, right?
Yes.
It's not just being appointed by Korean consulate in Portland, Oregon, or Seattle.
You have to. There was I was nominated by the previous honorary consul, and there were, I think, 3 candidates for the position, and we were interviewed by him, and then we met with members of the Korean community here in Oregon.
Wow.
To kind of, what do you think of this guy, and so forth. And then I think it was mostly handled by the consulate in Seattle, and I told you that they chose Susan Cox, who is my counterpart in Southern Oregon, my comrade in arms, I guess. Yeah. And so we were selected, and it took 4 months for the Korean government to okay it. Wow. And then it took 10 months for the U.S. government to agree. And so it was a long process.
Very rigorous process.
Yeah. And I guess they did background checks and things like that, but I don't really know. It was kind of secretive.
So what do you do as an honorary consul?
Well, I work with a lot of different groups. Our main thing is to improve ties or make ties between Oregon and Korea, especially in terms of trade, business, science, education, and culture. And so I work with many different groups. I work quite often with the Korean Society of Oregon. I work with a lot of veterans, Korean War veterans. That's really where I first started meeting them. And there are several groups, probably 4 or 5 groups that I work with. There's the Korean War Veterans Association Oregon Trail chapter. There was a Salem chapter. There's one in Vancouver, because I do cross the border over to Vancouver, even though that's not my territory. But they're much closer to us than Seattle. And then I work with the Chosin Few, and there's a Southern Oregon group as well. So the ones in this area, I go to many of their meetings and work with them. And we're doing an interpretive center now at the Korean War Memorial. We've raised about $185,000 for the memorial, the interpretive center. And I work with a couple school groups that send students, have exchanged with Korean schools. I work with Port of Portland, for example, and they have a Korean shipping company that comes here twice a week. Let's see, what else do I... just various groups like that. We have Kimwa, which is the Korean Intermarried Women's Association. They are married with American men who are here. They do a lot of social work for projects that we do. I work with the Korean language. They have a Korean language program with KSO. I work with them a bit. We've tried to start some Korean language programs in the schools. We've only done that with one. And so I just work with a lot of different groups. We have, for example, I work with 3 nations events. So China, Japan, and Korea. Each year we have an annual event that features music or dance or something from all 3 different cultures. Sometimes we will have the Korean, what's it called, the National Day, We've done that in Portland a number of times. I went with the Athey Creek students who have the exchange with Korea, and I went with them to Korea and spent a couple weeks with them there. It was a fantastic experience. So I just work with a lot of different groups that have things, connections to Korea or creating connections.
Sounds like more than a full-time job.
Well, yes, I
Did you know that you're going to consume so much of your time? And obviously, you must have spent your own money for all of this, right?
Well, a lot of it. We get $2,500 per year.
Per year, not per month.
No, per year.
Okay.
And I spend anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000. So it's not a moneymaker.
So
no.
you volunteer for
It's kind of
spending
volunteer.
your own money
Yes.
for Korea.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, yes, we do that for, I've given $5,000 to the interpretive center and, we're, different things. So, yeah.
Are you still happy about your role?
Yes, very happy. They've asked me to continue. And I said I will continue, but I may not finish the five-year program. If I am too pressed or if I can't do it anymore, I would have to resign.
No, you have a lifetime appointment.
No.
Okay. And by the way, I want to thank you for everything you have done for Korean War Legacy Foundation's interview trip of the Korean War veterans. It's the most well-organized and well-arranged the trip from my foundation's perspective, because you have done all those things. So I really appreciate what you've been doing.
Thank you.
It's my honor,
Yeah.
sir,
Yeah,
and thank you for everything. And I'm looking forward to meeting with the veterans
Yes.
who has really been the foundation of this metamorphosis of two
Right.
countries.
Right.
You mentioned about Kennedy, and I think that's the kind of trigger points where that you didn't know anything about Korea now, but you are honorary consul. Tell me about 1960s, growing up as a high school student and going to college, and what was the kind of things that you would characterize as a kind of features of American society in 60s and 70s?
Well, when I was in high school, I remember the Beatles becoming very popular.
Oh, I just watched the
Yeah.
Paul McCartney concert
Oh,
in
yes.
Dome in Syracuse.
Yes.
I was disappointed because he didn't sing much about the Beatles song, but mostly Wings,
Yeah.
But anyway, yes.
But I remember the Beatles. I had never heard of them, and then all of the girls in the school suddenly knew about them, and it was just everywhere. Everything was about the Beatles. Vietnam, of course, was beginning at that time in 1966, and that was a big worry for a lot of people. I had a couple of classmates who did go to Vietnam after high school, and two of them were killed in Vietnam. And of course the 60s and free, everything, free love, free
Hippies.
Yeah, hippie types were, that was very going on at the time.
Were you influenced by that?
Not really.
Not really, right?
Not really.
Yeah.
No.
And what is it? Why did you decide to join the Peace Corps?
Well, as I said, I heard John Kennedy talking about Peace Corps. And I had never really had the chance to travel, as I said, very much. And I don't know why, I was fascinated by that. But it was also because I did not really want to go to Vietnam to fight, because some of my classmates had died. And I didn't really believe in that war very much. So when I finished college, we had the lottery, when I was in college. And I got a low number, and my three best friends all got a high number, so they didn't
What
have to go.
does that mean? High and low number?
Well, they take 365 days of the year, and then they chose the numbers from, so these people, the first 100 people have to go, or what 100
Go,
dates.
go to war?
Well, they have to go to the draft.
Draft.
Yes. And so that's what, and I had a low number, and my other friends all had high numbers. So I really wasn't excited about going to Vietnam. And so I applied for Peace Corps, and it wasn't only to get out of Vietnam. I definitely was always interested in Peace Corps. So what happened was I decided to apply for Peace Corps. I got that finally, and they did a deferment. So they said you can go to Peace Corps for 2 years, but then when you come back, you have to go into the service. And so Peace Corps at the time, that was all okay, legal, and people were doing that. And so that came through, and that's how I went into the Peace Corps. And then on the third year that I was there, about 2 years in, I asked for an extension because they were still having the draft. And that was a little more difficult, but I was in Korea and they let me do it for a year. Again, saying, when you come back, you have to go to the draft. So I went home on break. They let us go after 2 years. You could go home for 1 month. I went home on break. And while I was home in North Carolina on break, going back to Korea, expecting to, President Nixon ended the draft while I was at home. But I went back to Korea anyway.
Why?
Well, because I felt I had a good time in Korea, and I enjoyed Korea, and I was learning a lot, and I had promised to go back. So I decided that's what I would do.
What did you want to become before you joined what was your lifetime sort of goal and wish?
Well, my parents wanted me to be a minister. Yes, and I studied religion for a while when I got to college, but then I decided, no, I didn't want to do that, and they didn't really object so much to that. So I changed my major to English, and I became an English major, and that was mainly based on 2 teachers that I had who were very good and made, they influenced me some too in my life.
Mm-hmm. So please tell us about the whole process of you joining the Peace Corps. When, where, what kind of training, and one of the main questions is, were you able to choose the country that you want to go? And if not, was Korea kind of surprise to you? Be honest about that. Mm-hmm. And so please tell me all about the whole process.
Well, I applied, I think, in my senior year. It was a pretty rigorous process. Of course, back then we didn't have that many computers and things like that, and we had none, I think. But so there was a lot of paperwork to do. They asked us on the forms where we would like to go, and I put down all warm countries. And
like a Maldives?
Well, I think the Caribbean, Tahiti area, those kinds of things. Maybe, I don't think Thailand was on there, not in Asia. And then, I don't know, there was timing to this because, sometimes I was graduating, so one of the first programs, I guess, for example, maybe if you wanted to go to Tahiti, for example, you might have to wait another year. So I think timing had something to do with it. But they didn't really pay much attention. I don't know anyone in our group who put Korea down as the choice. I think it's like in the service, they say, where you say you want to be a mechanic and they say you're going to be a cook, whatever. So that's how it happened. So then right after college, or maybe during my senior year, I was accepted into Peace Corps. And it was not an easy process. I remember thinking that I might not qualify because Peace Corps at the time was, it's fairly new. Well, I guess not, but it was, it was pretty stringent, you know, to get into it. But
What kind of qualification do you need?
Well, you have to
Did you need?
you have to be a graduate,
Right.
college graduate.
College,
yeah, and you have to have
With the
some,
GPA 4.0?
No, I don't. They never spelled that out. You had to put it. You had to put all that information in there, but they didn't say that it's based on GPA. But I had a good GPA. I wasn't worried about that. So then they had this pre-invitational staging. They wrote to me and said, "We're inviting you to come to Denver, Colorado, to this pre-invitational staging, and it's about Korea." So I started looking about Korea, you know, in books and whatnot, and then I
Were you disappointed?
No, not really disappointed.
Be honest.
No, I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't disappointed. I chose to go. I mean, I could have said no, and they might have sent us to another
Oh, I see. You have
pre-invitational staging. Yeah, oh yes. And not everybody who went to the pre-invitational staging went to Korea. So it was very interesting. I met, there were maybe 4 or 5 groups that I didn't see, but we had a group maybe of 20 people who flew into Denver, and some of them actually turned out to be in my group later, and we had several days, maybe 3 or 4 days of kimchi. You know, they introduced kimchi. I remember, what is that smell? That was our first reaction. And they had someone, you know, playing Korean music, and some people talking about ESL, teaching English as a second language. But it was mostly just a kind of quick introduction into Korea. So then we left that, and I was selected.
When was it?
That was probably in the summer, sometime I think, or summer of 1973. Because no, I take that back. No, it was summer of 1970. Yeah, because I had just graduated. So I graduated in May, probably, and we went to training in September, I believe.
For how long?
About 3.5 months.
Wow.
And that was in New Jersey, at Morristown, New Jersey, in a convent, a converted convent. We had, you know, we were very busy there. We had 5 hours of Korean language every day. And that was really tough. And then we had some ESL work. There was a teacher from Fairleigh Dickinson University who was a teaching specialist, and she would come. But no, most of the training was about language, because it's so important, you know, once you get there. So, but there was some ESL work. We did go to some schools in Newark, New Jersey, to do some practice teaching for a couple times. And then there were things like how to learn how to use chopsticks, for example, you know, and those kinds of things. But it was mostly language.
So were you able to speak Korean before you left?
It was tough. We passed the test.
Okay.
You know, we had to have a test and an interview and whatnot. But I think I learned most of my Korean in Korea. Definitely. I mean, it gave us the basis and whatnot. But,
so,
you know, and I'm not a good language learner. Some people are much better than I am. And so it was tough. It was tough. I remember going to my first class, and the teacher said, everything was in Korean. And she said, 평화봉 사탄원입니다. And I'm like, what? And then all the other people were 평화봉 사탄원입니다. And I thought, oh my God,
you're the only one.
I'm the only one. So it was tough. There was a lot of repetition, you know. 입니다. And 평화봉 사탄원입니다. And that's how they did a lot of the teaching at the time. So it was rigorous.
You're pretty good. So 선생님 한국 이름 있으세요?
네, 있습니다.
뭡니까?
칼두열.
예?
네, Caldwell.
Caldwell.
Yeah.
And so that comes from, must be
Caldwell.
from Caldwell.
Caldwell. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Same. Yeah.
You're pretty good, sir. We can go on in Korean
No,
for this
I don't think
interview. So when did you leave for Korea? From where?
Okay, we left after training in Morristown. They gave us maybe 2 weeks off or a week, something like that. So I flew back to North Carolina, said goodbye to my family.
But by the way, what was your parents' reaction to your decision to go to Korea?
My parents were always supportive of everything I did. So there was no, they weren't bemoaning the fact that I was going to Korea.
You were not going war, so.
Right, yeah. So they were always very supportive of anything that I wanted to do. So I went back to North Carolina, and with a friend who was, we flew to Columbus, Ohio, and stayed with one of our Peace Corps group who was living in there. Then we got on a plane in Columbus and went to Chicago. And in Chicago, we got on the 747. You know, it was brand new. It was like, I think they started in maybe March of that year. And so we got on a 747, flew to Seattle, and Seattle to Tokyo, because everything had to go through Japan. Korea, you could not fly directly to Korea. So we flew there. We spent one night in Tokyo because you had to, that's the way it was. And then we flew from Tokyo into Seoul.
Gimpo.
Into Gimpo Airport. And it was very, there were some very strange things about it because, for example, it was under kind of military rule at the time. And so as we were flying in January, a very cold time, and you could see, everything was brown, just brown. That's all it was. And then they said everybody must pull down the shades because they were afraid for people taking pictures of military installations and things like that. So everybody had to pull down the shades before landing at Gimpo. So we landed in Gimpo. It was pretty late in the evening, I think, when we got there. January. It was very cold.
Date, remember?
I don't remember the exact date. It was probably around the 15th of January of 1971. Mm-hmm. And then the ride in, we took a bus and rode into a Yogwan near Gwanghwamun, and it was very gray and dark. I remember that.
So you have a very sort of gloomy, negative kind of image of Korea.
Yeah, I mean, it was gloomy, right? I don't know that it was negative. We were, one of the things about Peace Corps training that I thought was very good, and I didn't think it registered with me at the time, but it did. They said, look, we're not going to Korea to help Korea. I mean, it's not like that we're their saviors, and we're going there to help the Korean people and change their life or something like that. They said, no, you're going there to learn, and you're going there to help whatever you can do. But you're not like their savior. You're not going to go over there and tell them, this is the way we do it in America, and you need to do it this way. No. You're going there to live with the people, learn from them, teach them what you can do, when you can help them in teaching English or something like that. And so I thought that was good because when I went overseas to China with some Lewis and Clark students, I found that, a couple of them thought, oh, I'm going over there to change China and teach them how to do things. And I thought that was a bad attitude.
Mm-hmm. It's a very important point. So can you describe about the major goals of Peace Corps
Yes.
volunteer program? Why did the American government launch the program? And why do you think it's radically different from the experience of missionary or the mission of the missionaries of Christian churches in late 19th centuries and early 20th century to countries like Korea
Right.
from volunteer, the Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah.
What is the major goal and why is it different?
Okay.
How different?
There are three goals. The first is to provide trained manpower in whatever area the foreign country needs. And I guess Korea decided that they needed to learn English. And I'll talk about that later. But
So it has to be approved and accepted and requested by the
Yes.
receiving country.
right.
Oh.
So they said, what do you want the volunteers to do? So in Korea, it was mainly English teaching at the college level and the middle school level. It was Pogunso, the health center. TB control, those kinds of
Tuberculosis.
things. Tuberculosis.
폐결핵.
Yes. And there was, what is it? Leprosy. work.
Leprosy.
And there were agricultural programs that people went to. And there were some community service things, like maybe helping with markets or something like that.
Contraception, birth control, things like that?
I don't remember that very
Okay.
much. Most of the health center workers were in TB that I knew of.
Yeah.
And so to provide manpower is one. And then secondly is for us to be good examples of what Americans are like and help the Koreans understand what Americans are like, that we're regular people. And then the third goal is to help Americans, when we come back, understand about Koreans. Mm-hmm. So those are the three goals. Just better understanding reciprocally between the
Of
two
each
countries.
other.
Yes.
But
And
it wasn't like a Kennedy administration forcing other country to accept the Peace Corps and trying to plant the American culture.
No. In fact, we were told that's not what we were there for. We were not there to be, to try to convert people to anything.
So that's the real difference between missionaries and...
It's not the only difference, because I grew up in the church, and we talked about Lottie Moon, who was in China, and every year they had fundraising for Lottie Moon and whatnot. And so I had a very good impression of what missionaries did.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thought about it. Well, when I went to Korea, I met a lot of missionaries, or some missionaries, and I thought that they would live like the people, but they didn't. They lived in compounds. They lived in American-style houses. Many of them had American food. They drove cars, which nobody did.
It's like extraterritoriality within Korea.
And I was very surprised at that. I told my parents, I said, we hear about Lottie Moon offering every year, and they don't live like the people. Peace Corps, you live like the people. So that was shocking to me. So, yeah.
So that's a radical difference. So meaning that you are almost like assimilated into the Korean life.
Yes. And the first time I knew that I was assimilated, finally, it took some time, was when we were in the 교무실 one time, and the teachers are all talking.
교무실.
교무실. And they were talking about something that the U.S. government had done. I've forgotten what it was. And they were talking about the 미국 놈. They were talking, and I'm sitting there, but they didn't even see me as a 미국 놈. They saw me as just another teacher. So I felt, in some ways, I felt honored.
So you were not 미국 놈 by then. 미국 놈 is like a little bit of
It's very negative.
negative sort of way to call Yankee or something in the Korean setting.
Right.
Yeah. So you were Korean.
And I felt good about that. So
You were successful.
yeah.
So since you mentioned about this life here, from Yeowon, the very so low level of motel,
Right.
called Yogan at the time in 1970s. And where did you go? And tell me about the whole process and how did you live? I mean, were you paid there in Korea or not? What about medical coverage, health insurance? All those things, please.
Okay, well, I arrived, we were in Seoul. My principal and co-teacher took the Kosuk bus, to Seoul, and they picked me up and took me back to Cheongup. And I was in Cheongup, Jeollabuk-do. From Seoul.
Straight from Seoul to Cheongup?
No, we were in Seoul for about probably 3 weeks, doing more language training, just kind of training. I don't remember exactly. And they had not really placed everybody. They were still placing people. Okay, you're going to Cheongup, you're going to Kimjae, wherever you're going, And so we never understood all that or how they chose anybody to go to one place. I think that there were some women who they tried to place in larger cities. And then, so I don't know really the ins and outs of all that. But anyway, that was I'll tell you this little story too. On my first bus ride down to Cheongup, I had some cookies or something that we'd bought or whatever. And so I think I was sitting on the window, and then my co-teacher was sitting here, and the principal was sitting across the aisle. And so I took the cookies out, and I offered it to my co-teacher. And he was horrified, and because he said, no, you have to offer it to the 교장님, first. And he was like scolding me, a little bit about you have to give it to him first, and because of the hierarchy. I mean, I'm sure they told us a little bit about that, but they didn't dwell on it very much. But that was my first lesson. So when we got to Cheongup, they put me, because the schools were in charge of finding a place for you to live. And Mr. Mr. Yu, who was my co-teacher, he lived right beside the Yogan. So he had contacted them and talked with them. And so I did hasukchip, like long-term stay with, and in fact, I lived there for 2 years. And my room was very small. I could just barely lay down it was probably, I'm 5'7", it was probably 6 feet wide and maybe 8 feet long. Very, very small, ondul, heating with charcoal.
Floor heating.
With charcoal. And then every night they would change the charcoal, sometimes during the evening and things like that. So, it was a very small room. We slept on the floor with a yo and ibul and a quilt and whatnot. And that never bothered me. The pillow was a rice pillow or a rice field or husk field. And then you were asking about pay and stuff. So we got the same pay as a teacher. Yeah, so my co-teacher and I would get the same pay. And then the school paid, or we get it minus our hasukbi, our rental. And then I think in Peace Corps they gave us, over the course of 2 or 3 years, they put money in the bank of about less than $2,000 for us when we came back. Yeah, but no, we lived like the Koreans.
Mm-hmm. So what did you do then in Cheongup?
In Cheongup, and I taught 7th grade. 1학년, right? 중학교 1학년.
Yeah.
And we had 72 students in each class.
Wow.
And it was kind of an unheated classroom. There was heat. There was one little stove. They had 2 charcoal briquettes in it that didn't heat very much. And the students wore uniforms. They could wear anything under the uniform, like underwear, long underwear, or whatever, but they had to wear the uniform on the outside. They could not wear gloves. And it was I don't know, it was very, very tough at that time. 72 people in the room, but very well disciplined. You know, it's not like, they were well disciplined. So, and then I taught 6 classes. There were 6 classes.
Every day?
No. 6, like 1학년, 1번, 2번, you know, through 6. And then the smart class, they kind of ranked them. So the smartest class was number 6. And then I think we taught 3 times a week, 1 hour a week. I usually taught with a co-teacher. I had 3 different co-teachers. So over the years, because I was there 3 years. Mr. Yu Jong-hee, he was the first one. And then Chae Young-hee, he was a graduate of Seoul National University, a very smart guy. And then Mr. What was his name? Just a minute, I have to think. I can't think of his name right now. But I had 3 different co-teachers. They were great in the fact that they would take me anywhere, you know. So if somebody was having a Pagil, you know, the 100-day birthday or something, okay, let's go to that. So we would go, they would take me to that.
And there is again, fish head.
Yeah, all kinds of. So then, or to a wedding, somebody's getting married, or a teacher's son, or somebody's getting married, then we would go to the wedding. Or they would take one of them. They would. He said, "I'm going to for acupuncture. Do you want to come and see what it's like?" So I would. They would take me to acupuncture. They would take me to. Sometimes we went to students' homes, you know, and they're always, you know, the teachers were held in such high respect. So the parents would just go all out, you know, with some food and drink and stuff like that. Or they would take, you know, we would go on field trips with the students to temples, or rice planting day, or tree planting day, or those things. So I was just kind of one of the group, and that's what we did. Mm-hmm. So,
how many hours per day that you had to teach?
Oh, we were there probably from 8:30, I think 8:30, and probably went till about 5.
5.
Yeah.
Wow.
And half day Saturday.
Half day Saturday.
Half day Saturday.
Right.
Yes.
So it was from Monday to Saturday.
Yes.
A lot of work.
But Saturday was just half day.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So tell me about.
And then the other thing I did was to teach a special class, Pochung Suap.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
So they chose, or I helped choose, about 25 students from the 6 classes who were really eager and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so I would teach special classes for them, usually in the morning, early morning. So we would do that. And that would be maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Mm. And that was great because they were really motivated to learn.
I remember I learned English in middle school, and we studied like, I am a boy.
Yeah, exactly.
You are a girl.
This is a book. This is a pen. Yeah.
How was it? How was students that you think they were about English, and what was the typical way that you teach English there?
Well, a couple of things about that. Okay, teaching, we used kind of repetition, and you in the book, and you would say, "This is a pen," and they would repeat, or you know, this kind of thing, and write it on the board and whatnot, and that's how we taught them. And then we would do dialogues. You know, I would call on 1 or 2 students, or they would do it as a class. You know, what is your name? They would tell the name or whatever. Every morning they would, when you would go into the class, they would say, "Good morning, good morning, sir." You know. And when you're passing them in the street, they would always salute. You know, teachers were held in such high regard. So that's how we did it, and usually with my co-teacher. So that was good. Now, what else was I going to say about that? Oh, I never. After I was there for about 6 to 8 months, I thought, why am I teaching these students English? Because they will never, ever use it, except maybe to get into to high school, on an entry test. And so it's not like I gave up or anything. It's just I kept thinking, these little boys will never have the chance to travel, to do anything like that, And so I thought, it's just kind of, I don't know why they want to study English. But I was wrong. I mean, as I told you, one of my students, Young-ho, he married an American. He went to the foreign language school, and he became a vice president of SK. One of my students became a doctor. Pang Ju-won, he became a lawyer in Seoul. And Mr. Pak Dong-min, he had his own company. Charles Ju speaks very good English, became the president of Toshiba in Korea. And
see, that's your teaching.
No, it's
you
not
thought
really
that they're not going to.
Well, they do say, we still get together and they always say, well, you inspired us, and whatnot. So it's very nice to hear, very meaningful, yeah, as a teacher, yeah. But but at the time, you could not imagine that they would ever travel outside of Korea.
Korea using English, right? Yeah.
Or just money-wise, you would think, because they were quite poor. One of the students, when I went back home, he was a very bright student. So my family, we sent money so he could go to high school. And we got him through high school. We didn't do it through college, but he's the one who owns his own company. And then he went to work for Samsung and started his own company after that, because Samsung used to make cars, but then they ended that. So he was in that division. He kept a company that he had. And then he went to college at night. So education is very important to Koreans.
Mm-hmm. So you arrived there January of 1971, and then when did you finish your whole mission as a Peace Corps volunteer?
December 1973. So I was there 3 full years, from January through December. But usually it's 2 years, but I extended, 1 year.
During that whole time, were there kind of moment that you regretted to be in Korea?
Yes.
Any kind of difficult things or something that you were really...
Oh, of course. I mean, anyone who goes to a foreign country, there's you have the first 6 months where you're all excited, and then you have the low period for some time as you're adjusting to those things. So it was not easy. It just wasn't. Because there's so many things that happen, so many cultural misunderstandings that happen and make you feel bad, and you're away from home. Oh, and to hear from my family, it took 2 weeks, like 10 days to 2 weeks. You would write aerogram. I think they had aerograms then. And then it'd take 2 weeks to get there, 2 weeks to get back. So it was, you were separated from family and whatnot. It was all different. But you worked through that period. The light for me was the students, and the Koreans. I mean, they were very welcoming and including me in so many things. So, but yes, there were difficult times. I had, and you were asking about health care. We had a Peace Corps doctor. So we would have to go, before we left, we had maybe 20 shots for everything you could possibly think of. Japanese B encephalitis, everything. Mm-hmm. And then when we got there, we would sometimes go see the doctor. I never really went to a Korean doctor, but I was never really that sick. Except we had worms, everybody did, sometime during the thing. And then they wanted me to come up to parasites. They wanted me to come up to Seoul and take this medicine. They said, you need to stay in Seoul. And I said, no, I don't want to stay in Seoul. I want to go home and take the medicine. And I did.
Why didn't you want to stay in Seoul?
To me, it was just, I didn't know. I wanted to be home.
Okay.
And make sure I knew where I was. I mean, it was better to be at home. So.
That's a 회충. Yeah, I remember parasite.
Oh yes.
Yeah, everybody had it.
Yes, everybody had it. Yeah.
Because at the time they used human waste as a fertilizer.
Night soil. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And they told us in Peace Corps, you have to either peel it, boil it, or what else? Or you had to cook it or something. You couldn't drink water. You couldn't drink. Except boiled water, those kinds of things. So,
what was the most rewarding moments that you remember? If I ask you to pinpoint one out of many, what would you say about your Peace Corps volunteer experience?
Well, I can't think of an episode. I just think that it opened up the world to me. And it changed my career path. I wanted to be a teacher, but I never thought about English as a second language. So when I went to graduate school at the University of Hawaii, I became an ESL major. That's what I...
After you're done with the Peace Corps.
After Peace Corps. Yeah. So it just opened up the world. It's a world that I never knew about, and how people think differently. And we got to travel some when we were in Peace Corps during the school break. It was a tradition going around Southeast Asia. And so that was fun. But I think just the relationships with people were the highlight. I suppose that's what I would say.
So let's go to this sort of a comparison. This is the question that I used to ask to the Korean War veterans because they were there in 1950s, and they were re-invited back to Korea by the Korean government, Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs, and so that they can be in a position to be able to compare what they saw in 1950 and now.
Right.
Around the time that you were there, 1970s, it was under the military dictatorship of Park Chung-hee, who also contributed to such a miraculous economic development in a very short time.
Right.
What did you feel about the Korean society at the time in 1970s? Political, economic situations, and so on.
Well, we were in Cheolapukdo, which is different. And so people, especially in Seoul, would look down on people from Cheolado. And the development was not there and whatnot. Of course, they were not very supportive of Park Chung-hee. He came to, while I was there in 1972 or 73, 72 maybe, there was an election, and he was actually running, and he flew in by helicopter to the school next door. And of course, school was shut down, and we all went over there to see him. And the teachers were kind of grumbling, about some of that. So it was definitely, it wasn't a democracy at the time, right? Even though they were trying to pretend that it was a democracy. Now, he did a lot of good things for Korea. And I know some people today still, some like him, some don't. But what he did, I always got the feeling he wasn't like Marcos. To me, Marcos was just in it for himself, stealing from everything. I never heard that so much about Park Chung-hee. So I think that he really wanted to help the country. He was not for the democratic process. He was definitely a dictator. So there are mixed feelings. We never talked much about politics when we were in Korea because we were told, that wouldn't be smart. And so,
That's the good and bad side of the President
Yes.
Park Chung-hee's
Yes.
legacy.
Yes.
But he is the most popular president, if you survey the Korean people.
oh really?
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am
was-
political scientist. I have a lot to say about what he did and good and bad, but we need to be really historically factual
Yeah.
and try to be objective about this. And many, independent countries after World War II had to go through all those military dictatorship and authoritarian regime.
Yeah.
But Korea is one of all those countries that came out
Yes.
quite different.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was very protective of the Korean economy, and basically self-sufficient. We want to be self-sufficient. You can't have McDonald's. You can't have whatever. And it was very smart policy.
So-called industrial policy.
Yes.
And
That what was the Seimal Undong? Seimal Undong, the
New Village
New
Movement.
Village movement. I thought at the time that was a joke. Every morning they would play the music,
Right.
wake me up. Everybody would go out and do
새벽종이
exercise.
울렸네.
And I thought, oh, how ridiculous this is. But, in 10 years, I went back as a Fulbright scholar, and I could not believe how the country had changed. It was,
So where did you go? What did you do as a Fulbright scholar?
I taught English English composition at Kangwon Daehakyo in Chuncheon for a year, academic year. And that was very interesting to me too, because the students that I had, they were in college, first, second, third year maybe. Many of them had never been to Jeollado. And I would say, why not? Where I lived, nobody goes down there. It's just, and Koreans don't travel that much inside the country. That always amazed me. It's a small country, but they don't do that very much. And everything is centered in Seoul. And so I encouraged them. I said, you should go to see your country and go to other parts of the country. I found that very fascinating, because there's definitely a lot of regionalism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But at the time, also the transportation matters and the lodgings and so on.
Yes.
So there was no infrastructure. We were
Right.
just worried about how we're going to be better and richer.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
And I know getting to Seoul. Now, my friends in Peace Corps, when we would meet, I had a good friend, David, from Portland, Maine. We would plan to go to Seoul at the same time. So like what we would choose, maybe once every 5 weeks or something, we would go to Seoul and spend the weekend. And the transportation, oh my goodness, it would take probably 5.5 hours to get to Seoul. And now it takes like probably less than 2 hours on the bullet train. So, and to go to the East Coast, that would take, I don't know, forever.
So now this is one of the questions that I asked to the Korean War veteran, but you are in a little bit different sort of context, because Korea kicked off its 5-year economic development plan in 1962. By 70s, they were focusing on heavy chemical
Right.
industry, but you've been back to Korea so many times, right?
Right.
So give us perspective about Korea when you were there, and Korea now, and what are the things that you think was possible, and had you ever imagined that Korea would become like this today?
No.
You know?
No, not so dramatically and so quickly.
So tell me about it. What are the differences?
Well, okay, look at when I was in Cheongup living at the Yogwan, we had no running water. We had a pump. We had no refrigeration. There were 2 refrigerators in the town, in a bakery. There was no one had a car. Everybody traveled by bicycle. There was you went to the Mokgyoktang, the bathhouse.
Public bath.
Public house. That's
Did
all.
you go to 2?
All the time. Well, I would go 2 times a week. Koreans would go once a month. But I would go 2 times a week, and they thought that was very strange. And I had a friend in Peace Corps, a woman who went every day. But and television, they had black and white television, maybe 4 hours a day or something. They didn't have it in the morning, they had it in late afternoon or something. No color TV. I mean, it was poor. And now, I mean, everything is so high tech. It's like they're further ahead of us in Korea than we are. So it's amazing now. It's clean. At the time, Korea was not all that clean. Everything's sparkling now. I think there's a lot more emphasis on helping families, supporting families and whatnot. A lot of things have changed. The nuclear family has broken down, and that's because the kids used to always take in the parents and stuff, and that's kind of breaking down. A lot of parents don't want to. They don't want to live together with their husbands are doing much more now in the home than they were then.
I do.
They have a role with the children, which growing when I was there, the dad was never there. I mean, he never had anything to do with the kids except, I mean, he would talk to them and everything, but the mom ran the family, and people had no money to do any kind of leisure activities except maybe hiking. But now there's so many leisure activities in Seoul or in Korea, and the families are much more of a smaller unit without so much the grandparents, but they do things together. The husband shares. It's not perfect, but there's more equality in that way now. And I think the Confucian system is breaking down a little bit. It used to be so rigid, and I know in the schools, because I've been back to the schools, I've been amazed, not pleasantly, that there's very little discipline in Korean schools now compared to what there was. And teachers are not nearly respected. When the principal would get up to talk, you could hear a pin drop when I was there. And now the principal's up there talking, and the students are just talking everywhere, paying no attention. I was shocked at that.
You go back and discipline them, please.
Well, it's different. It's different.
So, what do you think that Peace Corps volunteer program did for Korea?
Oh, well, we would say it did very little. I think as Peace Corps volunteers, we would.
Don't be too humble.
No, all of them say, everyone that I've ever talked with said, it's the toughest job you'll ever love. That's the one thing that people have said. That's talking about Peace Corps. But they, ask the question again.
What do you think that the Peace Corps volunteer program did for Korea, for what it is?
Most of the volunteers would say that we got more from Korea, or we received more from Korea than we gave. And you'll hear that from just about every Peace Corps volunteer.
Like what?
I told you, we learned about other cultures, other countries. We learned that people don't think the same that we do, that they have different views, that there's more than one way to look at a situation. The Koreans were always eager to improve. Education, they love education. And I have grown up to understand that education is very, very important to bringing people out of poverty and to changing their lives. And Koreans, they support education in every way possible. I think that's very important. So we learned to love another country. I love Korea. I've said that many, many times. And it changed my life.
largest economy in the world.
No, I did not. I did not. But after I went back to Korea 10 years later, I'm less surprised now about that, because I could see the difference in 10 years. I mean, people had cars, everybody had running water, everybody had different kind of heat. Oh, the bathrooms had all moved inside. That was the other thing, So that was shocking to me, that in 10 years that could happen. Oh, and the choga chip, the straw-roofed homes, gone. In 10 years they were gone from Semao Undong. That was one of the things. Yeah.
I went to Ethiopia to have interviews of Korean War veterans, and I was just naturally thinking about new village movement.
Yes.
To be there.
Well, I've heard that it's in other countries now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's through some kind of Koika program.
Yes. Yes. Oh, and one other thing I should mention too is that when I was there, Korea had a curfew.
Yeah.
So you had at midnight you had to be off the street from midnight until 4 a.m. And if you were out and caught, you could get in trouble. I never did that. I know other volunteers were out sometimes. I never did that.
You were too behaving.
I was behaving. That's true. And so that that went away. In 10 years, when I came back, there was no curfew. So there were lots of changes in a very short time.
Looks like and sounds like that your experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea really dramatically changed the whole course of your life.
It did. And I learned that you need to have a cultural kind of a informant, who and my co-teachers were very good about that. Sometimes when I didn't understand something or question something, they would try to explain it to me in Korean terms, But I think that's very important. And when I came back to the United States and I was welcoming all these international students, because that's what I was doing, in a way, I was their cultural informant for the United States, because they had all kind of questions. They had a lot of things they didn't understand, or why you do it this way or whatnot. So I felt that I was their cultural informant, and I was very direct with them sometimes. This is why we do this, and this is why we don't do this. Or people are interpreting, they're seeing what you're doing is negative, or you're not smiling enough, you're not involved enough, whatever. So that's kind of what I did for 35 years.
As you know well, the Korean War has been known as forgotten because the Korean War in the beginning, by the end of 1953, was not victory. Obvious victory
Right.
was a ceasefire.
Right.
And Korea was a foreign to all these American GI, American soldiers. And so that they didn't want to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. And obviously it's all about China or Japan in the curriculum in AP World History. For example, until 2016, there are more about 20 topics for each, for China and Japan respectively,
Right.
while there was no topic whatsoever about Korea in
Yes.
2016.
Mm-hmm.
And now you are far front line, talking about Korea, trying to promote the relationship more strong and more productive. And what do you think we have to do to challenge this place of Korea in our educational system? And
Well,
curriculum?
that's an interesting question, but I think Korea is doing a pretty good job of it now, because they are. What do they call that? what kind of diplomacy do they call it?
Public diplomacy?
Yeah,
People to people?
Yeah, public diplomacy and whatnot. They've always said, we're trying to do this, that, and the other. So in the beginning, when they were advertising about Korean food or their Korean, now they're, in the 29th, they're coming over, of October, we're going to do something about Hamburg and stuff like that. In the beginning, I didn't think that was going to work, but it's been very successful. Very successful. They find something like Korean food and they promote it, and in subsequent years you see that it's made a difference. Or that would be one. Even with their advertising of their cars and Samsung and all these things that they're doing, they're really, I think they're doing a good job of it.
Good.
Like their movies and a perfect example is the Korean dramas.
Yeah.
Now, I've hardly ever watched them. I've watched maybe 2, but a lot of friends and people I know, they will have hundreds of those on their phone or whatever, and are watching it, and it's been something that swept the nation, and that surprised me. But that's all kind of a public diplomacy that is kind of under the radar, but I think that has been very effective. BTS and all these things that they're giving public support to in those ways, I think it makes a big difference. So I think they've done a good job with that.
It's been more than an hour,
okay.
1.5 hours, but I can go for another hour, but I think we have to wrap this up. I see a lot of parallel between Korean War veterans and Peace Corps volunteers about the way that they saw Korea and their experience, and then what came out of your service and Korean War veterans, for Korea, what it is right now. So it's amazing. I think it's a good project for my foundation to launch about documenting and learn more about the Peace Corps volunteer programs for mutual understanding. What would you say to Korean people or the students that you used to teach in the, by 2026, U.S. will celebrate 250th anniversary of its founding, semi-quincentennial. And my foundation is working for promoting more of those curricular resources between these 2 countries. What would you say to Korea and Korean people about your experience and for the future? Kind of as a conclusion of this whole interview.
As I've said, I love Korea. It changed my life. I still have lots of contacts there. I still see my students. They think that it was a wonderful experience to have a Peace Corps teacher there. I think that there's so many things now, so many opportunities for travel and for exchange and across all kind of disciplines. It's opened up the world of both countries. So you see a lot of interaction between Korea and America. It's just not to the same in the academic world. When you're talking about Asia, it's true. It's always China and Japan, and Korea is the third. And I see that in every school, just about every school that you go to, if they have Asian studies, it's China, Japan, and then Korea is kind of tacked on. If they could offer more programs, I think, for educational institutions and whatnot, I think that would be good. Programs that lead to long-term faculty positions, rather than oftentimes it's a 3-year program, you put in half, we put in half, and then it ends because the American schools don't have enough money. And we did that with Portland State University. And we raised half the money. The Korean government, the Korea Foundation, gave half the money, and then we were hoping that the university would give, but they didn't. and so it ends. And that, I think, is kind of short-sighted.
That's a very good advice.
Yeah.
Very good advice. You have any immediate plan or program to work on right now to see the? Can you talk a little bit about interpretive?
The Interpretive Center?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's here in this building, and it's a small place, but the Korean War veterans wanted, the monument out there is beautiful, but it's static. And we thought that we need to have an explanation of what they're going to see when they go out there. There are names on there, 298 names of people who passed away.
From Oregon.
From Oregon. But we want to tell their story. So in the Interpretive Center, it's like these windows up here. We will have photographs of the veterans when they were in Korea. Mm-hmm. Some big, just face photographs, some with beside a tank or whatever, showing them when they were in Korea at that time. And then we will have 25 videos of Korean War veterans telling their story. They're about probably no longer than 5 minutes, but telling their stories. We have flip books. We have about 90 stories on flip books. We're going to do 30 at a time or something like that, so we can change them around. So those flip books will tell the story of the person, have a couple of photographs and whatnot. And then we'll have panels around, one panel is Korea today, how it has changed. And then panels on prisoners of war, panels about Tootsie Roll story, those kinds of things that people can view. Correct. So, and they'll tell their stories.
I wish you a big success, but also I want to continue to work with you so that we can share the digital archive that my foundation has accumulated.
Yes.
And we can be much more mutually beneficially working together.
Yes.
And I want to bring some conferences here in West Oregon. So because we've never been to Oregon, I know there is 35,000 Korean Americans here. Mm-hmm. I think it's a big right place to do for our foundations to do have some functions with you. Mm-hmm. So, but again, I want to thank you for your service as a Peace Corps volunteers and also Fulbright scholar. Mm-hmm. Now you are the honorary consul of Republic of Korea in Oregon. And thank you for everything that you have arranged. And I'm looking forward to meeting with the Korean War veterans who really changed the relationship.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.